Hello everyone, welcome back to Seltzertronics. I am the Seltzertron. Today we're here to talk about the Schiit Gungnir Multibit. This is my go-to DAC for quite a long time, for the last couple years. It's a very good DAC. It retails for about $1,250 from the Schiit website. And well, at that price range, you know, it plays in some pretty big leagues. And there is some pretty strict competition at that level. So I'm going to talk about its features. I'm going to talk about everything it does and doesn't do. It actually, despite its, well, relatively straightforward operation, it's one of those DACs that is pretty much just digital in, analog out. It still has some features that not a lot of DACs have, and I'll go over each and every one of those. As you can tell, it is a relatively large DAC. There are even larger ones. Its big brother, the Yggdrasil, is pretty much your full-size electronic rack component. This is maybe about, well, it's about just as wide, but it's not as deep, and of course it's, you know, only a few inches, 2-3 inches high. It has a vent on the top. You can stack things on top. It doesn't run too hot, so you can stack things on top as long as you do keep this unobstructed directly. Taking a look at the back side, you can see that it has, and this is one of those unique features, it has 3 sets of analog outputs, 2 single-ended and 1 fully balanced 3-pin XLR. The dual single-ended is actually great. I like to use that for testing amplifiers. If you're testing amplifiers, you want to make sure that you give an identical signal. That way you have whatever digital source you're running into the Gungnir, and then you have the dual single-ended outputs going to multiple amplifiers. And it works great. You have your digital inputs right here. You have a SPDIF coaxial and a USB. This is the Schiit's Generation 5 or Gen 5 USB, which is their most recently upgraded USB digital interface. And then you have another essentially SPDIF connector. So this uses the BNC connector as opposed to the RCA connector, like the standard SPDIF coaxial. Now, one of the things that I really liked about this DAC is that I actually used all 4 of these digital inputs. Now, for the RCA, I ran my Oppo Blu-ray player coaxial into here, and then into the BNC connector, I ran I guess it was probably my television, which has optical out, and then I did a little digital to digital conversion, and then I ran from RCA coaxial out to, and all you need is a cable with an RCA on one side and a BNC connector on the other side. The only practical difference in most cases is just the connector, right? So you can use an RCA to BNC. This is essentially a second coaxial SPDIF. And then you have the optical connector. And then of course you have a port there for your power plug. You can use whatever cable you want if you feel that that's important. And then you got a power switch. The power switch is on the back, which is not the most convenient place if you have this on something where you're not going to be able to reach into the back all the time. And that's, I assume, partly by design. The way Schiit's multi-bit DACs work in general, and many people say this about DACs in general, and especially true for multi-bit DACs or ladder DACs, is that you turn them on and you leave them on. Many Schiit multi-bit fans will even insist that you not only never turn it off, but to really fully appreciate what this DAC can do, you need to have it on for at least some number of hours. Some say 12, some say as many as 30 days to really reach optimal performance. I don't know if I've noticed anything quite so severe as 30 days, but these things are probably do run a bit better after they're fully warmed up. So you want to leave that on, switches in the back, and also, you know, there is no standby mode, which is I always kind of wish it did. I wish it had a standby mode, but you know, it's just got to stay fully warm and running. Yep, it's on all the time. Once it's on, your interactions with this device are going to be pretty limited. It has a button, there it is, a button on the front, and that button does exactly one thing. It switches your digital input from USB to optical to RCA SPDIF and then to BNC. That's it. No fancy anything. You can't screw it up. It just does. It just does. Analog in, oh no, strike that, reverse it. Digital in, analog out. The Gungnir, in terms of sound, I will just say that this is, and I hate saying things like this. I hate when people say, it sounds too digital, or it sounds very analog. It sounds very analog. I hate that because it doesn't mean anything in particular. I can't really put my finger on what that might mean. Let me just qualify that a little bit. In fact, you know what? Forget I said that. Here's what I'll say. This is the most vinyl sounding DAC I have ever owned. It sounds more like my turntable. And you know, I'm not an analog guy. I'm a digital guy. I have a turntable. I like to play records. I like to collect records. My turntable is not awful. It's okay. My interest is primarily digital. It sounds a bit like a turntable. It has the kind of rolled off highs a little bit. It has a kind of almost unnaturally wide soundstage that emerges out of maybe some elevated low-end bass. It's not going to make music bassy. It's not like an EQ, but there's just something about it that gives it a little bit wider dispersion in the very low frequencies that just kind of, because you can't really tell where those frequencies are coming from, it just sort of comes from everywhere. It just seems to spread those out a little bit, giving you the illusion of a somewhat wider soundstage. And that, combined with the somewhat rolled off highs, give it, I think, more of the character of a turntable. So this is what I believe a turntable lover's DAC. If you are primarily an analog person and you're used to turntables and you like your turntable, but you're interested in getting into the digital world or stepping up your digital game, maybe you've just explored somewhat and you've been using a relatively budget-friendly DAC or using the one built into your AVR, this is a significant upgrade. This will bring you into the digital world very respectively. In terms of comparison with other DACs, it competes. It's a $1,250 DAC, so there is stiff competition in that price range. That's about what you're going to pay for a Schiit ADI2 DAC, which I think is one of the best DACs you can get at that price range, hands down. Yes, I can distinguish the two during a direct blind ABX test, which I have them both run into my Audio God AG9 preamp, and then running through my Sonos Faber speakers. I have more difficulty doing it with headphones. I test all of my DACs with speakers. I believe strongly that the differences that DACs make are much more apparent with speakers. between the Gungnir and the ADI2, I can distinguish the two quite readily. The ADI2 is now my reference DAC for its neutrality, and this is where I hear the roll-off and the slightly expanded soundstage. You also, I don't want to say that it has less clarity, but where I had difficulty distinguishing the two DACs was when the AC was on. When the AC was on, I had difficulty distinguishing the two DACs. There was something in that just slightly elevated ambient noise floor that made it difficult for me to distinguish. Now, if you're just listening, I don't hear the noise floor, but it's there. It's there. And, you know, maybe this is going to come across as one of those things where it's like, oh, where I'm making a flaw out to be good because noise floor is generally considered to be bad, right? Except if you're talking to vinyl people, right? Vinyl people will insist that the very high noise floor of vinyl is actually a good thing, that it lends some kind of, you know, warmth or you know what, flaws can be a good thing, like soft focus filters in video and a movie when they have that kind of soft white kind of glow to bring back the nostalgia of some memory sequence. I know I'm exaggerating here because if you're just listening in a quiet room, you can't hear the noise floor, but you kind of can. Between the ADI2 and the Gungnir, you kind of can. I mean, you can't hear it, not consciously, but I could distinguish the two DACs when the room was perfectly quiet, or as quiet as I could make it. But when the AC was on, I could not distinguish the two. Right? And I believe that's because there is just a slight noise floor with the Gungnir. It's not enough for you to like consciously notice, but it is maybe there. And how that manifests in terms of subjective sound quality, I think favorably looking at it is it gives it a little bit of softness. And this is, again, kind of going back to where I think it sounds a bit more like vinyl. It just has a little bit of softness, whereas with the ADI2, you really get those sharp details, and maybe that's what the analog people feel like when they say, oh, this music sounds too digital. I think they're talking about some kind of edginess that emerges out of those very low level details. So with the Gungnir, those tiny sharp details that may give the impression of sharpness are just kind of smoothed over a little bit. So that's its analogness. It has outstanding imaging. It images great, especially on the left to right axis. It images pretty well in the Z-axis, although I do think the ADI2 maybe does a little bit better job here, and I think this is possibly to do with the noise floor issue. But you get generally a very nice image. It presents, I don't want to say it doesn't give you details, don't understand. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. It gives you details. But they're just not quite as sharp. Not as sharp. You still get the detail, that contour in detail and sounds. In my DAC introduction to DACs video, I talked about these little twinkly details that I hear in Daft Punk's Within from the Random Access Memories album. I drew these pictures of what I hear. You get all that. It's there. It's just maybe a little less sharp. But yeah, detail is very good. Imaging is very good. It's a great DAC. For $1,250, it should be something that you're thinking about. Again, I think for who should really choose this DAC is somebody who is maybe new to the digital world. Again, it is digital in, well, analog out. Digital in, analog out. No, that doesn't make sense. Digital in, no. Digital in, analog out. Digital in, analog out. That's it. Little button to indicate what digital input you want it to use, and then it does its thing. You leave it on, you don't turn it off, you forget about it. You leave it on for months, and you never even notice it. It just does its thing. And if you're, well, not completely sold on the sound of digital, if it's too sharp, too this, too that, you might consider the Gungnir. It gives you the benefits of a high performance DAC, but it does kind of smooth them over somewhat. And this kind of makes sense because, oh, what's his name? Which one's what? There's Jason and Mike. I forget. Because Mike over at Schiit, who designed this DAC, is, well, despite being one of the currently most popular and famed DAC designers, is an analog guy, prefers analog. He generally does not like digital, which is, I think, why he tries to make it better to his ear. It was designed, its character, what I'm saying is not, it's not a flaw in the design, it is a design. Right? It does have this kind of analog character, or maybe what true digital files might consider to be flaws. It has a little bit of that. The slower roll off filter at the top end. I'm not sure exactly what are the inner workings of Schiit's Super Burrito filter, proprietary filter, but it seems to take a little bit off the high end, and the noise floor is it's imperceptible, but it's perceptible. It's really just below that threshold of conscious detection. All right, so there you have it, the Schiit Gungnir Multibit. If you liked this video and enjoy the content that I put up, please go ahead and click like and subscribe. And don't forget to click that little bell so you get all the latest from Seltzertronics. Take care.